Now, an idea that I quite often refer to on this channel in describing my own gender and gender in general is the idea that it is on some kind of spectrum. As a way, really, of suggesting that it isn't binary. It isn't either this or that. But maybe this term is not quite accurate. Maybe it's not quite so simple. Binary to me implies boxes. And I think that's really what I react against. It tends to imply real opposing extremes or very clearly defined differences between A and B, between male and female. And it's probably behind the main issue for those who are gender critical, who believe that biological sex really is the main criteria for determining identity as a man or a woman. And also I think this features in some of the theories. A particularly well-known one is the orthogonophilia theory. A lot of scientific papers will tend to present models which inevitably involves boxes. But the idea behind a spectrum is also possibly not quite accurate either, because it implies a continuous rainbow of maleness and femaleness between two extremes. And the idea that any one person, as it were, at any one time is sitting somewhere on that line, maybe doesn't move typically. So that in itself raises the question of what maleness and femaleness, if I can use those words, if they exist, just created them, if not, represent, and whether there are other variables that come into play in describing gender. I think personally that there are. I think it can include other aspects of identity that we want to express. Aspects of our personality might include things like our ethnicity and cultural identity, which of course can also express themselves in how we dress and present to the world as well. When we talk about a spectrum as well, there would also be the question of where we cross the line between maleness and femaleness, or travelling in the other direction. And for example, where do those who were born intersex fit in, and where their gender has been very strongly socially conditioned? Tricky question. I don't think you could necessarily say right in the middle of the spectrum is where you cross the divide, but maybe it is if you could get accurate and universally agreed definitions of what maleness and femaleness are. Or indeed, we might bring in the idea of masculinity and femininity, energies, qualities, attributes, and again, that's a very difficult issue to agree on, to actually come to definitions. Those of us who do feel we're probably near the centre, as much as one exists, and who flex sometimes either side, as well as those in the trans community who know and have always known perhaps that they are in the wrong body. They very clearly identify with the sex against that which they were assigned at birth. Probably are very clear about where they want to be at any time. And the same is probably true of most people. I suspect that those that might have most difficulty with the idea of a spectrum and the idea that it isn't just about two extremes are those, the gender critical particularly, who believe that sex and gender is primarily or indeed exclusively defined by biology. But as we know, or as most of us know, gender isn't that straightforward, and as I've said before, and I'm sure you know, gender and biology, sexual natures are actually different things. I don't quite know how to describe the different aspects of what might characterize this spectrum, how you would begin to identify maleness and femaleness and be able to pinpoint at any one time exactly where you were on the spectrum. But maybe that's partly for me because I'm always, or typically, in a state of flux. I suspect that different people would interpret my place, for example, on the gender spectrum differently, perhaps, from what I would perceive myself, because, again, we're going to have different views on what makes up this spectrum, how it operates, where that middle line, or that dividing line, perhaps I should say, really is. However, I still prefer using this term as opposed to talking about a binary. I don't really know what the alternative is, even if it's not a totally accurate description. Certainly the idea of contrasting ultra-feminine, ultra-masculine, X and Y, as it were, doesn't work for me. However we describe our gender, it's still, I believe, a beautifully colourful, multivaried, and, for some of us at least, ever-changing mystery. And I love that.